US President Donald Trump is back in Washington after what he claimed was a successful meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. The trade war has come to a halt with the reduction of tariffs and a more favourable trade relationship. Well, that's the hope anyway. But there are new concerns this morning about nuclear proliferation. We'll get to that in a moment. But joining us live is the Republican strategist John Jordan on this Friday morning. Good to see you again, John. So a bit to talk about with this meeting yesterday, but let's start off with China. Is the trade war at an end, or is it something of an uneasy truce now?
No, it's not at an end. This is an uneasy truce. Keep in mind, this is a great power conflict between China and the United States. And it's not just between two countries. It's two systems. It's Chinese communism and state planning versus economic freedom and pluralism that we have in the West. And the Chinese, they intend to supplant world government and replace the West systems with its own. I mean, that's what they say they want to do. They can't. So this is a temporary truce because both sides need it. Think Christmas truce during World War I. They agreed where they could, and they ignored a lot of the other issues where the conflict will continue.
So do you think, just like a flash, something happens in the next few months or whatever? Soybeans purchases is gone. The export controls of rare earths could well be back on, and then the tariffs are back up again. Is that possible?
Yeah, it's possible. Keep in mind, there's a broad spectrum of areas where the United States interacts with China, just even on the economic front. Do I think that the Chinese will not play the rare earths card again? They say they won't for a year. This agreement's good for a year, but they've lied and they've broken their word before with President Trump in last terms, and they've broken it with President Biden too. So we'll have to see, but at least we have a temporary peace.
Yeah, there is something now. We like to talk oil, and we know we like to talk about its relationship with Russia. So if the US sends more oil to China and then China accepts, the point of that obviously being to stop China's purchase of oil from Russia, first of all, do you think that'll happen?
Well, keep in mind the Chinese, they import 90% of their oil, and they needed it. They wanted it the cheapest price, and that, from their point of view, is actually entirely reasonable. Right now, they're getting steep discounts on Russian Ural grade crude. The next cheapest source for them would probably be the Middle East. The only way the Chinese back off Russian crude purchases is if they decide they really want to send a message to Moscow that the war needs to end. And that, I think, will be one of the leading indicators that China is pushing back from the table in Ukraine. Right. I think there's a chance they may do that, actually, because the United States had a big diplomatic coup in the Middle East recently, and I think they may want to be seen as a peacemaker around the world. So it wouldn't surprise me to see Beijing try something like that.
Do you really believe that?
No, I just said it's very possible, and it would make sense. It's a strategically smart thing for them to do.
Yeah, but if that were to happen, what would that do to the war? We've already spoken about India and its oil purchases from Russia. Would that bring it to an end then? Because it would hurt Russia's bottom line.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. Already we're seeing both publicly, the Indian government refineries and Indian private sector refineries start to pull away from Russian oil. And, India is the largest seaborne purchaser of Russian crude there is, and about 40% of Russia. So we'll see Russia's oil income from exports. So we'll have to see how that turns out. If that's sustained, that puts a big dent in it. The Chinese may or may not be able to take up the slack, and they may choose to do it by just negotiating lower prices with the Russians and reaping the windfall. But there's some signs that China may be pulling back and trying to nudge Russia towards the peace table, but this may be an opportunity for China to really play the world peacemaker and try to seize the center stage of the world and saying we're the ones that ended the Ukraine war and try to build some goodwill in Europe. We'll see, but it's possible.
It's fascinating, the geopolitical system at the moment. It's fascinating stuff. Let's get to nuclear now, John. The US says it wants to resume testing, sparking some concerns about nuclear proliferation this morning. The president and the vice president have also said this morning, well, they've just got to make sure it all works. Is it something to be alarmed about?
Not really, because nuclear testing, for example, nuclear weapons testing is such a broad category. It's something that is so broad as to almost be meaningless. Nuclear weapons are not something you build, you put on a shelf, and you hope it works 40 years later because you built it during the Cold War. for. They have to be re-engineered, refabricated, overhauled, and there is some testing, and that's even but it isn't. The testing does not necessarily have to involve a nuclear detonation. They can detonate some of the conventional explosives used to trigger that nuclear fission or potentially fusion reaction. So it doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be above ground testing. There hasn't really been that since the Test Ban Treaty in 1962, and we're a country to have an above ground nuclear test. That would be a big deal and be a big deal diplomatically and expensive politically for that country that did that for little gain.
So that would be unlikely.
Yeah, there's other ways to test nuclear weapons and their components.
Yeah. Okay. Good as always to see you, John. Appreciate it. I'll chat to you again soon.